What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, the 8th movie in a franchise that goes back to 1996, but it goes back to 1966 if you include the TV show. I don't really know the TV show all that well. I caught a few episodes as a kid, but I do know the movie franchise pretty well. And as you've seen in the trailers, all the previous Mission Impossible movies are relevant to the plot of this movie. So you got to be up to speed on the entire history to get the full experience. But I'll be going spoiler-free for this video. I think I can make all my points about what works and what doesn't without divulging any plot-specific details, but it is helpful going into the movie if you have familiarized yourself with the history of this franchise. I think The Final Reckoning compares favorably to the rest of the franchise, but I don't know if anybody's going to say it's their favorite Mission Impossible. It's a little overly long. It has one awe-inspiring extended action scene at the end of the movie where you're like, oh my god, I didn't even know this sort of thing was possible. Once again, this is Mission Impossible, so the stunts should feel impossible, but I guess my favorite Mission Impossible movies, probably the very first one by Brian De Palma, is still my favorite movie, but obviously the movies are more famous for their individual scenes or stunts as opposed to the movies overall. Like when you think about like Rogue Nation, you think about him taking off on the side of that plane, or when you think about Fallout, you think about that bathroom scene where he and Henry Cavill get the shit kicked out of him by that total badass. Or when you think about Ghost Protocol, you think about him climbing up the side of that building, or Mission Impossible 2, climbing up that cliff in the beginning. That's what we remember from Mission Impossible. And I do think people will remember the two propeller planes chasing each other in Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning for the rest of their lives, because it's totally unlike anything else going on in movies today. Usually with like a big budget franchise, whether it's Marvel or whatever, you have a bunch of actors standing around board in front of a green screen interacting with props that aren't even there or characters that aren't even there. And it gets very boring, and it gets very disposable, and it gets very interchangeable. There's nothing more authentic and nothing more intense than seeing an actor's face rippling in the wind as they're hanging onto a plane in their 60s. I mean, Tom Cruise. I don't know what motivates or drives him at this point, but it is truly insane. I'm sure his net worth has got to be, $500 million. Who knows what his net worth truly is? But what drives him? What makes him want to keep going back up into the air on these planes and jumping out of planes, jumping off of buildings? I really have no idea. I guess he's addicted to the adrenaline. He's addicted to creating these entertaining experiences. I think people will get their money's worth from Mission Impossible: Final Reckoning. I just don't know if people are going to come out of the theater doing cartwheels. Like, my crowd seemed very enthusiastic. They were kind of chattering very excitedly after the movie, and there's a lot of applause. But it was only about half full, which I thought boded very poorly for its overall box office. It's got big competition this weekend with Lilo and Stitch, and we'll just have to see how well it performs in comparison to that little devil monster. But as far as the plot is concerned, this is all that IMDb has to offer over on their site. Our lives are the sum of our choices. Tom Cruise is Ethan Hunt in Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. Like, what bullshit? Like, who wrote that? There's nothing there. Our lives are the sum of our choices. You could apply that to every movie ever made. Our lives are the sum of our choices. Yeah, like, no shit, Sherlock. But in any case, if you saw the previous Mission Impossible movie, you know there's a big AI entity out there that's trying to take over the world and threatening nuclear annihilation to the 8 countries that have nuclear weapons. And there's a 1 in a billion shot that they're going to be able to stop it. And of course, that means Ethan Hunt is going to have to do a lot of really crazy shit in order to make that happen. And everybody in the world is going to try to either arrest him or kill him or prevent him from saving the world. But eventually, he and his team will save the day, as they do in every single Mission Impossible movie. And I guess one of my big criticisms of this movie is that the plot at this point, 8 movies deep, it's gotten so vast, and there's so many speaking roles in this movie. I feel like they probably could have cut the running time in half as well as the cast in half and not negatively impacted any of the good qualities of this movie. And I love his team, but there's a big problem where anytime they're planning one of their next big missions, you have 8 or 9 people standing around in a circle, all finishing each other's sentences. But at a certain point, you're like, couldn't those 2 characters just been merged into one? And couldn't those 2 characters be merged into one? And in pretty much every single scene in the movie, I was like, The scene could be shorter and there could be fewer people and you could just simplify it and you could streamline it. But this movie had a ton of problems throughout the course of the production. They had to shut down production and they had a lot of reshoots because when the previous movie didn't quite work, they decided to kind of retool this one to make it fit in with the overall franchise a little better. But all the big exposition heavy sequences were kind of ruined by my theater, the AMC Kips Bay here in New York, because in their infinite wisdom, they forgot to turn off the lights as the movie started. And IMAX screens are more or less transparent. If you've got like big fluorescent lights on, you can see right through the IMAX screen. So we were basically looking at like scaffolding and like storage boxes and all this crap behind the screen as the movie opened up with this really long highlight reel from all the best scenes from throughout the franchise as Angela Bassett explains the plot. And by the time they came in and apologized and turned off the lights and announced that they could not start the movie over for whatever reason, I was so pissed and I was so incensed that I basically couldn't hear a single line of dialogue for the next 10 minutes because I was just stewing in my own fury. So if my memory is not too distorted by my rage I was feeling at that time, the first 20 minutes or so definitely felt like the weakest, where they're just basically shoveling a lot of exposition-heavy gobbledygook down the throats of the audience, kind of trying to bring people back up to speed, reminding people of all the key characters and plot points across the previous 7 movies and how they're all feeding into this latest one. And it's pretty clumsy and it feels like a little bit like a Frankenstein's monster, kind of haphazardly assembled from a bunch of different reshoots. But at a certain point, the overly large cast finally finishes explaining the overly complicated plot, and Ethan and his team are finally able to go to work doing what they do, and there are basically 2 major missions at hand in this movie. Obviously, they have to go find that submarine at the bottom of the ocean to get the thing so they can take it to another place and do the other thing, which will stop the thing from destroying the world. It's like, get this thing so you can go over to this thing and stop this thing, and that's basically all you need for the plot. No one cares about all the technological jibber jabber going on in between. They just want to see Tom Cruise hanging off planes or Tom Cruise swimming underwater doing crazy shit, and they want to see astonishingly beautiful women. And this movie definitely has all the above in abundance. It just sadly has a lot of like excess fat on the bone that does not need to be there. Just to put it in perspective, The Godfather, which is a full-blown American epic, is 2 hours and 51 minutes long. Mission Impossible Final Reckoning is 2 hours and 49 minutes long. It did not need to be 2 hours and 49 minutes. It probably could have been a lean and mean 2 hours and been just an absolute thrill ride from start to finish. There are definitely plenty of scenes just like, are y'all really going to explain the plot for 10 more minutes? Like, can I go buy some popcorn and come back in? You're still explaining the plot one more time. All we know is that, like, you need to press this button while this person's cutting that wire, while this person's pressing that device, and then it's all going to be fine. Yada, yada, yada. However, it is fun seeing Hayley Atwell and Pom Klementieff, if I'm saying her name correctly, as part of Ethan's team. I feel like they never should have gotten rid of Rebecca Ferguson from their last few movies because she was an excellent addition to the team. But Hayley Atwell is one of those women where she's just so beautiful that she makes life worth living. Like, it's just like when she walks onto the screen, like, all right, y'all can talk about the weather for the next 20 minutes, and we're going to be just fine. And I think she's got some pretty good chemistry with Tom Cruise and the rest of his team, and so I liked her quite a bit. And Pom Klementieff, she's so like lean and athletic and muscular. She's like a little stiletto, a little razor, and she is fun to watch in action. When she's doing like a little somersaults and breaking elbows, whatever, and popping up and shooting somebody in the head, you believe it. She's a very quick, nimble actress and a very physical performer, and she's great. And Tom Cruise, in spite of the fact that he's in his early 60s and has been a movie star for 40 years, he's still got it. And I'm amazed at how well he's still able to run. Like, doing like pull-ups and that sort of thing is one thing, but like your knees and your back can get a little uncooperative and a little stiffer as you get older. But there are at least 3 or 4 different extended sequences where he's still hauling ass and doing his thing. And Glenn Powell said one of the best pieces of advice that Tom Cruise ever gave him was, he said, hire a coach to teach you how to run on screen. Like, running in a pickup game of basketball with your friends or on the soccer field is different from looking cool on screen. And there's a certain form and technique for dramatic purposes where you need to learn to run for the movies. And so we'll see if Glenn Powell can take that advice to heart in The Running Man later on this year. But getting back to Cruise, I like him as Ethan Hunt, but I don't love him as Ethan Hunt. I feel like the role doesn't necessarily challenge him dramatically at all. Obviously, the challenge with Ethan Hunt is riding motorcycles off cliffs, or clinging to the side of planes as they take off, or climbing up buildings, or in this case, hanging onto a propeller plane as it's flipping and going sideways. And just, I mean, it is incredible what Tom Cruise is willing to subject his body to. He is a completely, totally fearless physical performer, but he can act. Like, when he wants to do comedy, he can do Tropic Thunder, which is absolutely hilarious. Or if he wants to do full-blown drama, he can do stuff like Eyes Wide Shut or Magnolia. Or if he wants to be a villain, he can do stuff like Collateral. Like, he's got dimensions and qualities as a performer that he very rarely taps into these days, just because the Mission Impossible franchise, as well as Top Gun Maverick, have dominated his schedule for the last few years. But I feel like at this point, it wouldn't be the world's worst idea if both he and director Christopher McQuarrie were to take a break from the franchise. Christopher McQuarrie is a good director. His last 4 movies have been Mission Impossible movies. He went from Rogue Nation into Fallout into Dead Reckoning Part 1 and now The Final Reckoning. But I feel like Christopher McQuarrie, perhaps he's been underutilized. He also perhaps needs a few fresh challenges just to, kind of rediscover his love of filmmaking. And I'm sure he and Tom Cruise have a blast cooking up all these crazy stunts. But dramatically, from a story standpoint, I feel like the two of them are capable of more than what Mission Impossible has been offering over the last 2 movies. And I think a big flaw of the last 2 movies is that we don't have a villain as compelling as Henry Cavill was in Fallout. There's something about Henry Cavill's character starting out as a good guy, or at least a good guy in disguise, and then going evil. And that helicopter battle with Tom Cruise when he's got like a machine gun, he's got the blood dripping down. He just looks so fucking cool. He was a really believable villain. And either he should have had a twin brother who came back in the next one. Like, I like Esai Morales as an actor. I've been watching him since La Bamba in the 1980s. He's a good actor. But there was something about Henry Cavill's physical presence that made him perfect for the Mission Impossible franchise. And I think Fallout will remain a lot of people's favorite Mission Impossible movie of the Christopher McQuarrie era, because the first half it was Brian De Palma, then John Woo, then J.J. Abrams, and then was the 4th one Brad Bird? I think so. Can't remember. Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. Do. Yes, indeed, Brad Bird. But getting back to the villains, Esai Morales is a good villain as Gabrielle, but he's underutilized in this movie because the main villain is the Entity. And every time one of the characters in the movie refers to the Entity, whether or not they're going to destroy it, stop it, enslave it, take it over, whatever, I felt like the entire theater got a little bit dumber every time they mentioned it. The whole concept of the Entity just feels so incredibly lazy and boring. And this is at a time where a story about AI would be more topical than ever, but this screenplay just absolutely had no idea what to do with the Entity. And I think the movie will suffer. Like, the length and the lack of a great villain are definitely going to be obstacles to this movie. But I think the crowd who likes Mission Impossible will be loyal and they will show up. The question is, will the casuals enjoy this? Will the casuals come like, oh my God, I'd never seen a Mission Impossible movie before, but that was just absolutely incredible. Maybe. I wish I had a more favorable kind of like rave review to offer, but this movie's got like an hour of really, really cool action and then just tons of filler. But I feel like the filmmakers who work in the action genre today need to rediscover the fact that you can put more into your movie than just fight scenes and stunts. A perfect example would be the Eiger Sanction. I did a 50th anniversary review for that a couple days ago, and it has Clint Eastwood climbing up rocks and cliffs and mountains and doing all these crazy stunts that were just absolutely jaw-dropping 50 years ago as well as today. They're amazing. But the movie also has a ton of humor, and the movie has casual sex and nudity and just a bunch of great character work. So it's got more than just the stunts and the fights as the feature attraction. Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning is sorely lacking outside of a few key action sequences. Like, the sub scene is really, really cool and beautiful and atmospheric with all this great underwater photography. It was like something that James Cameron would shoot. And there are a few little shootouts and knife fights kind of scattered throughout the movie that are pretty cool. And obviously, like, the last 45 minutes of the movie is just one prolonged action sequence where you're just like, this is what y'all do better than anybody else. Like, as advertised, this is the ticket that I bought, and you're giving me everything I could hope for and more. But a little more humor wouldn't have been the worst thing, or a little bit more sex appeal, or a little more something. The only time I kind of laughed or giggled in the entire movie was when Tremel Tillman showed up as Captain Bledsoe, and I could hear the rest of the crowd and the rest of the audience laughing as well. But there's something about the way he interacts with Cruise and the way he's talking about his adversarial relationship with the Russians and so on and so forth. He just has this great comedic timing where, given very little material, he was generating laughs. I was like, God damn it. Give that guy a raise and give him a bigger part the next time around, because he's fucking incredible. And when you look at this cast, there's so many actors that we've seen deliver solid gold in so many other shows and movies, like Nick Offerman or Holt McCallany or Simon Pegg, Ving Rhames. Who else is in here? Angela Bassett obviously is a living legend. And there are a ton of actors who you'll recognize from earlier Mission Impossible movies, but I don't want to spoil that here. But if you know the franchise well, you're like, oh yeah, I remember that guy. He was in that previous movie for 30 seconds, and now he's got a big role here. And that is cool. I really do sincerely hope that when some of the younger fans see this movie, it'll get them excited about going back and watching the earlier movies. Because if you fall in love with the first Mission Impossible movie, it might cause you to fall in love with the films of Brian De Palma and work your way backwards. Like for me, from like 1969 or 70 up through Mission Impossible, that was like the great heyday of Brian De Palma's career. And he's one of my favorite filmmakers of the last 50 years. But after Mission Impossible, his movies started to fall off. And some people will defend Snake Eyes, but yeah, with Brian De Palma, I mean, you got Mission Impossible, but obviously you got Carlito's Way and Carrie and Blowout and The Untouchables and Scarface and Phantom of the Paradise and Hi Mom, and the list goes on and on. Sisters, he's a true legend, and when they hired him to do the original Mission Impossible, it was just pitch perfect hiring when it came to a director who knew how to heighten the suspense and the tension and the drama every step of the way, especially during that great heist sequence in the vault in the first movie, which I still think is like the best sequence from any of the Mission Impossible movies. And all it is just Tom Cruise just kind of hanging suspended above the floor, but the scene was incredible. But as far as how well this movie might perform is concerned, a lot of people are predicting the biggest Memorial Day weekend ever for the movie business this weekend. Between this and Lilo and Stitch and a few of the other movies that are still out there, there are a lot of reasons to go to the theater. And if some kids go to see Lilo and Stitch and they want to then say, hey, let's go see Mission Impossible next, like, more power to him. I think that'll be absolutely fantastic. But I heard a crazy stat from Matthew Bellany the other day. Matthew Bellany's a classic Hollywood insider. He runs the podcast The Town. He says between the reshoots and stopping the production and starting back up again due to COVID, that the budget for Final Reckoning is more or less like $400 million. And I don't know if that includes the filming for Dead Reckoning. I don't think so. I think it's just for Final Reckoning. It's being officially labeled as a $400 million film. It would have to be the most popular Mission Impossible movie yet to justify that level of budget. I really have no idea. But the tracking is estimating that it's going to open to around between 75 to 80 million over the 4-day weekend here in the U.S. But I do think there'll be a ton of people who come out of Final Reckoning and say, you know what, I want to go home and watch Fallout, or I want to go home and watch Dead Reckoning again, or I want to go back and revisit one of my favorite Mission Impossible movies. I imagine there'll be like a trickle-down effect where Blu-ray sales and digital sales and that sort of thing for the rest of the franchise will all skyrocket. So maybe the overall comprehensive business plan for the franchise does work, but I really have no idea how well this movie will do. I think the last one grossed about $575 worldwide, but they lost all their IMAX screens to the Barbenheimer phenomenon, which really had a negative impact on the first Mission Impossible movie. This time around, Mission Impossible gets to dominate the premium format screens for a while. So I'm rooting for the movie. I like seeing big, crazy movie stars doing big, crazy stunts. And I feel like if the movie does well, then perhaps other, aspiring stars will follow in Tom Cruise's footsteps. Like, will Glenn Powell ever try to take the mantle of Tom Cruise and like, you know what? Now I'm going to do some crazy stunts like my hero and idol, etc. and so forth. Film history is littered with legends over the last 100 years where you have actors performing incredible stunts, whether that's Burt Reynolds or Clint Eastwood or Buster Keaton or Jackie Chan or Michelle Yeoh. I mean, the list goes on and on. Across every country and every era, you can find actors who are willing to do crazy fight scenes or crazy car stunts or crazy skydiving stunts. And I love it. I hope that tradition will never die. And in an increasingly digital and AI kind of focused age, it's just so refreshing to have an actor who's like, you know what, we're going to go up into a plane and show you something that you've never seen before. And that is why I think Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning is 100% worth seeing in the theater on the biggest IMAX screen you can find, as long as it's not the AMC Kips Bay here in New York, where the first 10 minutes might get ruined by having the lights on. But I think that's about all I have to say. As you can tell from the sound of my voice, I'm a little off, fighting a little bit of a cold and a sore throat, but I'll be back at you tomorrow. I saw The Life of Chuck last night, but I was feeling too rotten to do a review right after the movie. But I'll be doing a big spoiler-free review for The Life of Chuck tomorrow, assuming that I don't start coughing up blood between now and then. In any event, I'm looking forward to reviewing that. I hope you enjoyed my review for Final Reckoning. If so, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.